You can never have too many monster movies. Westerns, superheroes, rom-coms, sure, but monster movies? Never. However, there are only 24 hours in a day, with at least 8 of them spent on work. Lame, so you'd be forgiven for missing some of them. You absolutely must watch the monster movie canon, from black and white classics like King Kong and Godzilla to big-budget Hollywood blockbusters like the Jurassic Park series and the Monsterverse. But besides these essential monster movies, there are a lot of high-quality gems. And by high quality, we mean raging cinematic dumpster fires, but with monsters. For our list, we skipped C-list, straight-to-video schlock, sci-fi channel mockbusters, and movies so obscure that not even the director's moms bothered to watch them. We also excluded human monsters, a la Freddy, Jason, and Michael Myers. Every movie we chose traces its creature feature origins to Willis O'Brien, Kong, A.G. Tsuburaya, Godzilla, Ultraman, and Ray Harryhausen, pretty much everything else. Some of these monsters are based on real animals, just with the volume turned up to 11, while some exist only in their creators' imaginations, which is definitely a good thing. You may remember them, you may have even seen them, but they all share one thing in common: there's a 967% chance you barely remember them. Which ones should you watch, and which ones should you skip? Join us as we journey down monster memory lane. Here are monster movies you've probably forgotten about. Pretty much the only books that make money these days are celeb memoirs, yaw novels, and novels you don't want to admit you're actually reading. Cough, 50 Shades, cough. The 80s and 90s were a much different era. This was the heyday of airport paperback thrillers, from the likes of John Grisham, Michael Crichton, Tom Clancy, and Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. The latter duo's unlikely bestseller, Relic, was about an ancient monster who wiped out the dinosaurs and is now going on a killing spree in the Museum of Natural History during the biggest fundraising gala of the year. How do you not love that setup? Millions of readers did, making Relic a bestseller and getting Hollywood's attention. Released in 1997, the movie inexplicably cut Agent Pendergast, who debuted in the novel and became the centerpiece of several Preston Child-penned sequels. It also didn't impress critics or moviegoers much, with a 36% critics score and 34% audience score. But who needs tomatometer ratings when you have a monster that chomps people's heads off? Well, turns out that wasn't enough, as The Relic bombed with $33 million on a $60 million budget. So you probably didn't see it and have completely forgotten about it, but despite all the flack it gets, it's still worth a watch. After all, the creature design is pretty unique, and who doesn't want to see a monster rampaging through a museum? With a cool setting and an interesting beast, we're hoping this delightfully bonkers bomb will no longer be a cinematic relic. Film directors tend to follow a tried and true path. Get noticed on the indie scene, go to Hollywood, have a horrible experience, redeem themselves, maybe. Enter Guillermo del Toro, who caught Hollywood's attention with his Mexican vampire flick, Cronos, and made his American debut with 1997's Mimic. Despite the movie happening more than 2 decades ago and del Toro since becoming a 2-time Oscar winner for The Shape of Water, the experience of making his first American film still stings. During the BFI London Film Festival, via IndieWire, del Toro didn't mince words, saying, "My first American experience was almost my last because it was with the Weinsteins and Miramax." So Harvey Weinstein is a bigger monster than the bugs in Mimic. No surprise there. Del Toro went on to say, "2 horrible things happened in the late 90s, my father was kidnapped and I worked with the Weinsteins. I know which one was worse. The kidnapping made more sense, I knew what they wanted." While Del Toro hated working on Mimic, critics dug it, giving the sci-fi horror flick about mutant insects in Manhattan who can appear like the humans they hunt a respectable 64% on Rotten Tomatoes. Moviegoers were less impressed, judging by the film's 37% audience score and $25 million box office. But we've got to agree with Roger Ebert, who said Del Toro takes the standard ingredients and presents them so effectively that Mimic makes the old seem new, fresh, and scary. In other words, for monster movie fans, Del Toro's Hollywood debut can't be mimicked. Given they're essentially prehistoric monsters who went toe-to-toe with dinosaurs, it's surprising, and a shame, that there aren't more movies starring rampaging crocodilians. There's 1980's Alligator, which finally answered the question, what happens to baby alligators when you flush them down the toilet? Answer, they eat lab animals injected with growth hormones and go on a killing spree, duh. Then there's 1999's Lake Placid, which answers, what would happen if a 30-foot crocodile lived in a lake in New England and was raised to be a killing machine by Betty White? This question needed to be answered, and the answer was awesome. Sadly, critics and moviegoers didn't think so, sinking the crock run amok film with 47% and 37% respective tomatometer scores and a $31 million gross, which didn't earn a profit on its slim $27 million budget. Why, moviegoers? Besides Betty White, whose supporting turn was praised for being worth the price of admission alone, you have Bill Pullman, Bridget Fonda, Oliver Platt, and Brendan Gleeson clearly having a blast with TV writer David E. Kelley's smarmy dialogue. It wasn't enough to save the movie, though it did inspire a surprising number of sequels and rip-offs. Aquatic predators became big business after Universal's Jaws swam into the record books during the summer of 1975. Or so producers thought. Rival studio Paramount wondered, what's more deadly than a great white shark? The answer was Orca, the killer whale. Just so there was no doubt, the 1977 thriller even included a scene of an orca killing a great white. Naturally, Jaws 2 clapped back in 1978 by having the shark leave behind a whale's remains on the beach. It was an unnecessary dig. Orca was never any threat to Jaws as king of the cinematic seas. This is despite the fact that Orca assembled a very respectable cast. Richard Harris, Charlotte Rampling, Will Sampson, and Bo Derek. Clearly, this wasn't meant to be a low-budget mockbuster but a serious tentpole. Alas, Orca was horrible, eventually earning a 9% critics score and 33% audience score, while its $14 million gross would have made Jaws laugh, if, sharks could laugh. This wasn't a thriller, just sillier, with an outrageous story in which the titular whale seeks vengeance on the fisherman who killed his family. That's not a typo, this is a whale revenge pick. Which is kinda awesome and worth a watch, just don't expect the quality of Jaws, more like Jaws, the Revenge. Jaws meets Alien with a touch of The Thing sounds like the greatest Hollywood pitch ever, so we can definitely see why MGM bought into it. Alas, that's all 1989's Leviathan is, a shoddy assemblage of much better movies. Here's the story. An evil corporation hires a crew for a mining project in the ocean, but the crew finds a sunken ship and accidentally brings a dangerous monster on board. That's a cool, if cliché, setup, and the film has a pretty stacked cast. Peter Weller, Richard Crenna, Ernie Hudson, Daniel Stern, Hector Elizondo, and was directed by George P. Cosmatos, the director of Rambo. First Blood Part 2. Alas, Leviathan drowned under the weight of its own mediocrity. The worst part of the movie is what the audience paid to see, the thrills, the kills, and the monster. It just goes to show how much different Alien, or Predator, would have been received if their star creatures looked like Leviathan, which appears to be the love child of Reptilicus and a Kraken on meth. It's bad. Seriously, did they blow the budget on the cast and couldn't afford a legit monster? Anyway, the 24% critics and 26% audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes tell the tale, as well as the atrocious $15 million box office. With a 68% score on Rotten Tomatoes, the original 1958 The Blob, starring Steve McQueen, is a cheesy B-movie classic. The remake 30 years later? It's more blah than blob. During the 1980s, it became trendy to remake sci-fi horror films from the 1950s with hard R levels of gore, blood, and violence. The two most famous examples, John Carpenter's 1982 remake of The Thing, and David Cronenberg's 1986 remake of The Fly, succeeded brilliantly. So it's no shock that TriStar Pictures figured they'd strike gold by doing the same thing with The Blob. However, both Carpenter and Cronenberg had something to say besides adding more blood. The Blob did not. It was just gore for gore's sake. And while the other two commented on the fears and paranoias of the 1980s, much like the original films did in the 1950s, The Blob was content to peddle in cheap thrills. Little wonder then that The Blob is the least remembered of the bunch. With a 62% critics score and 56% audience score, it's not that bad for the genre, but its $8 million box office and non-existent legacy means plenty of folks didn't see it then and haven't seen it since. Most filmmakers tend to follow familiar origins when it comes to their creatures' backstories. Giant animals, aliens, dinosaurs, alien dinosaurs, the usual. Add a nuclear bomb for little spice, and you've got yourself a monster. For 1982's provocatively titled Q, the Winged Serpent, the producers went with a more original backstory, an ancient Aztec god. Before he became infamous as the star of a cult B-movie, Quetzalcoatl was a feathered serpent dating back to the 3rd century CE. About 18 centuries later, Quetzalcoatl went Hollywood, proving even pagan deities can't resist the allure of the silver screen. Besides having an unorthodox monster, Q has a non-traditional story. Michael Moriarty throws caution to the wind, playing a New York mobster flunky who finds the mythical monster's nest in the Chrysler Building. Throw in David Carradine and Richard Roundtree as NYPD detectives trying to determine who, or what, is massacring people on rooftops, and you've got the perfect recipe for an entertaining 90 minutes. The film's 71% tomato meter score shows critics were in on the joke, while its 42% audience score and atrocious $255,000 box office shows moviegoers weren't. Not a lot of people saw Q, but we know for certain who did. Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich, as the ending to 1998's Godzilla, is virtually a shot-for-shot remake of the big finale in Q. Any movie can rip off a blockbuster after it comes out, but before that takes a special kind of knockoff. Enter Carnosaur, which was rushed into production and theaters on May 21, 1993 in order to beat the blockbuster creature feature it was cribbing, Jurassic Park, released on June 11, 1993. While you got to admire that work ethic, it didn't really help, as Carnosaur only mustered a measly $1.7 million, less than Jurassic Park, made in 1 hour. The movie is about a mad scientist who plans to wipe out humans with flesh-eating dinosaurs in order to protect the planet, but only a security guard can stop her. Like John Hammond, Jurassic Park spared no expense when it came to making realistic dinosaurs. Carnosaur went another route and focused less on realism, more on gore. Of course, the movie was bloody mess, resulting in a 10% critics score and 23% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Interestingly enough, Carnosaur stars Diane Ladd as the mad scientist. For those who don't know, she was a film and TV star of the 1970s and 1980s, and she's also Laura Dern's mother, who played Dr. Ellie Sattler in Jurassic Park. We're sure they talk about dinosaur movies all the time. Not every monster movie has to be a horror or sci-fi film. The Water Horse, Legend of the Deep, is the only movie on this list that isn't scary. Well, it's the only one that isn't meant to be scary. The Water Horse is a family-friendly fable about the world's most famous cryptid, all due respect to Bigfoot, Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. A boy in the Scottish Highlands finds an egg, which hatches to release a mythical water horse. What follows is a familiar storyline as the lonely boy and the creature become best friends, and the kid has to hide the water horse from his mom and bad guys who want to capture him. Have we seen this set up 10 million times before? Yes. Do we care? Not when it's done as well as The Water Horse. The movie earned a respectable 74% critics score and 62% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and it made a profit with $103 million worldwide on a $40 million budget in 2007. So why did you, probably, forget it? Blame the timing, as the 2000s were packed with family films competing for the money in mom and dad's wallet. If you didn't catch it the first time, The Water Horse is definitely worth a watch. Virus is the type of movie where you may remember the poster or trailer and go, oh yeah, that movie. We'd be impressed, and a little suspicious, if you've actually watched it. Put simply, Virus is bad. How bad? A 12% critics score and 21% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Bad. In the film, a tugboat crew caught in a typhoon boards a mysterious vessel, despite warnings of the sole survivor to not go near it. Wouldn't you know it, there's an evil alien on the ship that views the humans as a virus and begins killing them off in horrific ways one by one. Virus really wants to be Alien at sea, but despite a fairly strong cast, including Scream Queen Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Sutherland, and William, did you mean to cast Alec Baldwin? Virus just can't get past the hump of its own pointlessness. It's basically Sphere, Red Planet, or a million other late 90s, early 2000s movies where the filmmakers skipped an original story and thought they could just throw special effects at the screen and make money. It didn't. Given the cinematic death sentence of a January release date, Virus made a minuscule $30 million on a $75 million budget in 1999. That's a big enough bomb to make any movie studio sick. Think that giant gorilla movie subgenre only includes King Kong movies? Not even close. While there's no shortage of body, bewildering, and just plain bad Kong knockoffs, the most famous rip-off, 1949's Mighty Joe Young, is actually really good, with a 95% tomato meter score. So, given Mighty Joe Young is much more kid-friendly than Kong, it was exciting when Walt Disney Studio decided to remake this story of a young woman and her pet giant gorilla monster for the 1990s. However, the Mouse House didn't have much luck with the Big Ape. Despite starring a post Twister and Apollo 13 inches Bill Paxton, and, you know, a giant freaking gorilla, Mighty Joe Young bombed in '98, earning a less than mighty $50 million on a $100 million budget, and despite also starring a pre-Monster and Mad Max Fury Road Charlize Theron, it wasn't that good either, earning a mediocre 55% critics score and 40% audience score. While Mighty Joe Young wasn't very memorable, it was historic, as it encouraged Universal to postpone their King Kong remake for 7 years, during which time the would-be remake's director, Peter Jackson, made the little-seen indie hit The Lord of the Rings, so thanks, Joe. Deep Rising is not to be confused with another movie released in 1998, Deep Impact, which isn't to be confused with the other asteroid movie released that year, Armageddon. Confused yet? Well, Deep Rising isn't an asteroid movie but a pirate movie, albeit set in the present day. A pirate monster movie sounds like the greatest thing ever, right? Not so fast. In the film, a newly unveiled ocean liner on its maiden voyage is invaded by jewel thieves, who also have to contend with a larger threat, a murderous kraken. Despite that insanely awesome setup, and the equally amazing tagline of "Full Scream Ahead," Deep Rising doesn't really deliver, as it only managed a 28% critics score and 43% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes after it was released in January 1998. Its January release date proves the studio's lack of faith, and they were right to be skeptical, as Deep Rising drowned with $11 million. If you've forgotten Deep Rising, the director Stephen Sommers is probably glad you did. He immediately followed this 1998 flop with the 1999 blockbuster, The Mummy, which earned $416 million worldwide, more than 40 times what Deep Rising made. That might be the biggest and quickest comeback in monster movie history.